Hello and welcome back to Shelf Centered. This is Bryce. I wanted to bring a quick review of the Silmarillion. I did a reread recently and wanted to get it out before the Rings of Power series from Amazon comes out. And obviously that's kind of why I reread it, but I figured I'd give my thoughts here before that since it does come out very soon, and then maybe some thoughts about the actual show afterwards. So before I get into a little story that I have just about reading The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion the first time, I want to just a quick breakdown of what the Silmarillion even is. So the Silmarillion is broken into 4 parts. They kind of overlap and go together, but they're kind of also separate parts. And so you have it starting out with Ainulin Dale, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing any of these things right, but anyway, that's the first thing where it's essentially the creation of the world. You've got Iluvatar, which is kind of essentially God, but they're making music, and I kind of love how the world is made with music, and then there's a discord in the music, and that would be Melkor, who's one of these, what's called Valar. There's the Valar that are essentially the creators of Earth. So again, we're looking at like God, then Jesus Christ role. But in this, it's a team of people, multiple different kind of gods that have created this world. They also begin the creation of essentially, and it's very short, this first part, it's essentially the creation and then followed by this kind of setting up the stage of Melkor being a thorn in everyone's side forever going forward. And before I get too far, this is no spoiler, as you'll see in the title. So next you have the Valaquenta. So again, the Valar. These are, again, the people that have, the entities, I guess, that have created the world. There's different specialties. There's the one of the sea, what is it? And then there's, I don't have them like Stephen Colbert had them with James Franco. Editing Bryce here, just heading to court here in a second, but I thought I would actually just throw in the clip because it's way more entertaining, showcasing the Valar than I will ever be. So here you go.
I've been rereading the Silmarillion lately.
Yes.
Name me just two of the Valar. 2 of the Valar.
Do you want the Valar of water, Olmo, or do you want the hunter of the Valar, Orome? Or do you want the Valar of the trees, Yavanna? Or do you want the craftsman of the Valar, Alaway? Or do you want the lord of the airs, Manwë? Or do you want his wife, Varda, called Elbreth by the elves, who kindled the stars? You come into my house? You come into my house? How dare you?
And then already it talks about the firstborn, and this is already getting into, okay, setting up the next stage for. So there's essentially this god Iluvatar, there's Iluvatar, then the Valar, and then they have what's called the firstborn, which are the elves, and then the secondborn, which are humans. And so it kind of just sets the stage for this. So in the same way that is, I guess, the technically part of the world and can open this up, that's absolutely it. The rest of this, after those first 2 parts, kind of the majority, the big chunk of the Silmarillion is going to be entailing mostly kind of some stories that J.R.R. Tolkien was working on, and that his son, Christopher Tolkien, along with Guy Gavriel Kay, who I believe was a graduate student at the time, so this is kind of Guy Gavriel Kay's first entrance into the fantasy world, and because I read some things where Kay kind of understood, hey, the writing process, you don't just like write something and then it's like magically amazing. It's a process, and so clearly Tolkien had gone through just tons of notes. You may consider the Silmarillion the fire and blood of the Tolkien universe. So it's kind of where just the notes to kind of set up and give real depth to the world of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. This is where it all kind of started, and definitely we're getting worked on before the actual Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit were done. And so So under the Valaquenta, you have this, the Quenta Silmarillion. And so you have all of these stories. There's a bunch of stories that are somewhat tied together, especially around these things called the Silmarillion. And it kind of revolves around, there's these trees in Valinor. And Valinor is kind of where the Valar lived, right? Everything is all kind of related with the same names. And they're just so beautiful, these trees, that essentially it even, the elves divide themselves eventually into like those who actually were able to witness the trees, and then those who were not, the dark elves essentially, who have not witnessed these trees ever in their life, because that's how just amazing they are. You even have some references in this and then other, really more, as I understand it, in the histories, the unfinished tales about Galadriel, her hair just being that beautiful and kind of have like being reminiscent of these trees that are just gorgeous. Anyway, so but the trees, the elves want to kind of preserve at least this light, this beauty, but the trees aren't there forever, and so they create, well, Fëanor of the elves creates these things called the Silmarils, and they become highly coveted. They become what everyone is fighting over, including Melkor. So you get kind of now into the stories, right? The actual stories of the Silmarillion, and this is the fun part, the good part. Then you've got the Akalabeth, and again, I'm probably mispronouncing it. There's a little like hat over the E, and I have no idea how to pronounce that. I don't think it's an umlaut. And then lastly, you have the Of the Rings of Power section, which actually kind of gets into what we know and well, the Fellowship of the Ring, all of those things, and just, you know, the fallout of that and everything. But the real meat is those stories, and that's what makes this fun. So starting out, this is story time. I first watched the first Lord of the Rings movie. I was in high school. I loved it. It blew my mind. I wanted to get an ending because we didn't have the next movie until the next year. So I remember it was the spring break when I finally had some time after, so the Lord of the Rings movies came out in December. The spring break after that, I got all of the trilogy, and I remember just blazing through it. This is what got me back into reading. I was a reader when I was younger, but in high school, we're talking later years of high school, I was back into it, and I just fell in love. And in fact, it's that kind of feeling that pushed me on till now to kind of continue to find that immersive world, to be so immersed in this world. And really, I've only encountered really one other series that has had me this immersed. And if you've seen the channel, you'll know. You can look around. It's not too hard to find. So, of course, once I blazed through those, I'd actually already read in junior high, I'd read The Hobbit, so I already knew, like, kind of vaguely some things. But that was for school, but at the time I remember being like, hey, for a school book, this is great. But that was about the extent. It didn't push me. I remember being like, I should read the rest of this, and I didn't. But so I had actually watched the first movie, then I read them all, and then so I technically read some of the books before some of the movies, but it was the movies that really got me going. So, and of course, so I was such a Lord of the Rings head at the time that I jumped right in. I had to have more. I jumped right into the Silmarillion, and I absolutely loved it. I love the stories. There's just so many great stories in the Silmarillion. You have, and again, I'm not going into spoilers, but just some of them, like Beren and Luthien, which essentially is the precursor to Aragorn and Arwen, if you know that story. There's also just some epic some epic tales of, you have the Silmarils, you have Melkor, who's named Morgoth by, I think it was Fëanor, because he just to give him a terrible name because he's a terrible guy, and how Morgoth is able to kind of convince the prideful to follow him, just the wars that are happening, all these things. And so you just have so much going on, lots of great stories, and I just absolutely loved it. But I also have to say, I did not continue on in any more of the histories or the unfinished tales or anything like that. And having reread it recently, I have to say this is one of those. I went off on Fire and Blood already, and that's why I kind of brought it up again here. Reading it again, it was significantly more boring. So I felt for the people that I know there's a lot of people that have struggled with the Silmarillion, and they're not wrong. This is a tale that is it's told rather than shown for the most part. There's a little bit of show, but it's mostly tell. It's just a tale that's told like a history book. It is, here's this what's happening, which makes sense. Those are the notes that he's not going to go into telling a tale in his notes that are the background of these stories that he's actually telling. And that's why I think you love them so much, because of this epic, huge history. But again, it is what it is. So I struggled this time a lot more, even though I remembered a lot of these stories and went, oh yeah, I remember, and you have these epic tales like and essentially the Silmarillion is has been at least the jumping off point for a lot of the kind of standalone books that keep being released. It's like, hey, let's expand on the children of Hurin. They're contained in here, right? If you want the story, but it is very succinct, you have it in here. If you want the tale, again, in the shorter version of Beren and Luthien, you have it here, but also there is a full-blown book that you can purchase with that. I mean, there's the ride of Fingolfin. There's all these epic moments, but I have to say it's just not as powerful when it's told to you as a history and not actually when you're not in the heads of the characters and you're in and you have the drama and everything, which really that's what I'm here for, as I've learned. Overall, it's still epic, still worth it. Still, if you're a fan, you're going to get so much out of this, but I just had to say that it can be rough. And I even listened to it on audio. It can be rough, and it's slow going. And I didn't, I was such a Lord of the Rings head when I first, I was just so into this world that this was just having more was it was so delightful, and learning about the histories of the whole earth. And it's just amazing. You have those jokes where you're like, what is that one joke that these web comics, they're just great. They're like, what's the first thing that you do when you're creating an epic world? Oh, you create great characters. No. First thing, you create a language. And so it's just funny because that's essentially why this was all written, was because Tolkien, the linguist, was creating new languages. And again, that's one more reason why it has so much depth to it. And the beauty of when you actually see the script, like the Elven script or the Dwarf script, and it's just so much more realistic because of all this that went into it ahead of time. And I think that's exactly what Guy Gavriel Kay found out. So now I got to talk about the Rings of Power show. I think the original trilogy, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Rings, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King, brilliant. Some of my favorite movies of all time. I think they might be my favorite movies of all time. Now tell me to rank them, it depends on what I've watched recently. But having said that, then The Hobbit comes around, and already when you were told that the book that's slimmer than one of the three main series books, and I know you can make the argument, it's only one book, whatever. One of the three, it's shorter than any one of the three of the main series that were published, and the way they're published was made into 3 movies when each of those bigger books was made into 1 movie each for the original. After The Hobbit, and it shows, I've only seen the Hobbit trilogy one time in my life. I've seen the original trilogy countless times. I don't know how many times, so who knows how many times actually. And I think that's telling, and it was, especially after watching The Hobbit, less is more approach has been my approach, has been my thoughts on the series. But I do have to say, even though this is a series, could be even more than one season. Who knows? They're throwing so much money at it. It just seems like it would have to be. But at least similar to Fire and Blood with J.R.R. Martin and the Song of Ice and Fire or Game of Thrones series, whatever one you want to call it, there's at least so much to draw on here that I'm excited, like that I have to give it to it. That the less is more isn't necessary, because at least it's not just like The Hobbit, one small story that you're like, oh, that needed 3 movies. That's insane. As opposed to this, which is like 30 stories, lots of stuff to pull from. I have to say, Galadriel, though, was not as huge of a part of this as, at least, as the series is making out to be. So it's making her out to be, right? It seems like Galadriel is going to play a huge part in the series, The Rings of Power. And I have to say, she's barely featured in here, but again, it's like her roles, though, are pretty important when it comes to her time. So having said all that, I just I'm still weary of the series. I'm concerned about it after The Hobbit. Peter Jackson not really being involved is one where it's like, on one hand, oh man, that seems bad because the original trilogy was so good, but then it's like, well, it's probably a good thing because the Hobbit trilogy was what it was. Had moments. But so this is one where I'm getting a lot of, just in watching the trailer, a lot of Hobbit vibes, where it's a lot of CG in it. It's concerning me, and just like, if you have that much money, make these good, make them realistic looking instead of just essentially a cartoon on the screen that with some like real people in it. Anyway, I have my concerns. What else? Although at the same time I see a lot of people like poo-pooing the trailer, I got excited when I saw those elves surrounded by orcs. Just right off the bat, right? Like, that was exciting. That was like, oh my gosh, okay, this brought me back to the original trilogy. So I'm going, okay, that's great. That looks good. It's kind of too generic of a trailer to really, it has the looks stuff, like what? But I know that's how trailers are done. It kind of bugs me, but you have, the constant like, looking into the distance or whatever, and you're like, to introduce these characters, and I don't know, it's like trying to be epic. And then you have like, and just a concern is just where they're maybe not treating it as seriously or what as maybe they should, is just you have this kind of song that's more modern, but they are trying to like, back it up with the classical instruments. But I mean, we're talking even older than the Lord of the Rings, and it's just like, I want more of like that. I'm a diehard rock fan, but man, did I listen to the Lord of the Rings soundtrack so many times. They're so good. They're great to study by, but also just to listen to. They're just so powerful, and I've done a lot of listening to them over the years, because you can always go back to them. They do not go out of style, which again, that's why it's like you avoid this modern kind of music in a series like this that's trying to be epic and long lasting. I mean, we have elves that like are hundreds of thousands of years old. I have my healthy concerns just about this, and then you have like some leak or CEO, I forget, but anyway, I forget where the source is, but it sounds pretty realistic. But someone essentially from Amazon was like, this series needs to hit or we're done with this stuff, pretty much. And it's like, then, I don't know, I felt like you could have done a lot of things already so much different. We just barely had some trailers. It felt like the build-up to this could have been so much better and so much more epic, and it just kind of all fell flat. I mean, the excitement was like, it seemed like it was people that weren't even like, they were like fans, but like not really knowledgeable. Like the interviews that I saw of like people getting excited and hyped for it, and it was just like, get to some substance here. And then it felt like they've kind of like almost tried to alienate fans off the bat, going like, hey, we know you're already not gonna like this, and we're just going all in on that. When it's like, you have a huge fan base, you could at least try. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm happy to be wrong. Like I said, there's moments where I'm getting excited, right? This trailer, I was excited for numerous parts of it. So I'm still hesitantly optimistic, but I think most of this hesitancy stems from the last entrance that we had to Middle Earth, which was the Hobbit trilogy. And it was just, even for me, I liked the first film in that, and I remember by the third just going, that's enough. I'm done. It was just too much by the end. So anyway, what are your thoughts? Are you hyped for the Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power series from Amazon? Have you read the Silmarillion, and what are your thoughts on it? Did you love it / get bored with it? On either one of my reads, which Bryce were you? Were you the original reader of the Silmarillion, or the later one who was a little bored by it? Anyway, thank you so much for stopping by. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and we'll see you later. Bye.